What's up guys, Chris here, back into Borderlands, and of course today we have a new update coming up. This is going to be the hotfix for October 17, and it contains a whole bunch of very important changes. To be more specific, there's a bunch of nerfs over here to certain weapons, to certain grenades, but also some buffs to certain classes and functionalities. So we're going to jump over everything you need to know about these, and of course if you enjoyed this video, a thumbs up on it would be super appreciated. But in this case, the update should go live in about 6 hours from this point at precisely 3 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time today, and these are the changes. Of course, there's weapon hotfixes over here to all of the manufacturers, there's changes to grenades, to artifacts, to the Vault Hunters, and some hotfixes and bug fixes later down the line. But let's start things off with the actual weapon hotfixes, as these are quite important and quite significant. So we are going to start things off with the melee one, and the Western gun damage was increased by 25%, the ASMD damage was increased by 28%, and the only one that was nerfed over here is the Cutsman, which unfortunately saw its damage reduced by 25%. So this is quite unfortunate because the Cutsman was one of the only good melee weapons, or one of the few at the very least, and it was one of the weapons that I found myself using the most. Western gun, at the very least, that kind of makes up for it. Western gun was also a weapon that was in a pretty good spot, but now with the 25% damage increase, hopefully it's going to pick up the slack, because the Cutsman, yeah, that is quite a significant nerf. Anyway, TDR 10 gallon damage increased by 8%. In terms of Vladoff, a whole bunch of changes over here, quite a few of them. The sickle reload speed was increased by 25%, the phaser damage increased by 15%, infinity damage by 40%, magnificent by 25%, Jericho by 40%, and yeah, these are all buffs overall. These are weapons that normally didn't make it like the top spot or anything. It wasn't like you would use these in comparison to other ones that are way better, and this is why I wanted to bring us to Lucian's Call, which saw its accuracy and handling reduced, and this was a pretty accurate weapon. It doesn't really say here by how much the accuracy and handling has been reduced, but I am pretty sure it's going to be in the range of like 25%, just like how everything else has been up until now. So yeah, a pretty significant nerf over here as well, but the biggest one is to Liuda's critical damage bonus that has been decreased by 30%, and they made a modification to address a reported bug that an extra bullet was spawned in the center. So just to give you like a full breakdown of how the Liuda is supposed to work, it's supposed to shoot one projectile that actually becomes 3. So once you shoot it, it eventually splits into 3 after a certain distance. But the problem is there was a bug in the game that made so that the projectile would actually become 4, so you would actually do almost double the damage the weapon was supposed to do. So this is something that was addressed in this patch, and now not only is the Liuda damage pretty much being fixed, but its critical damage bonus has also been decreased. So I'm really curious to see exactly how significant this nerf is, because it kinda sounds like it's pretty massive, and it's not the only one. Unfortunately, it's not the only top gun that has been nerfed like this in this patch. This brings us to the Torg, and the tribal damage has been increased by 25%. So with the Alchemist, at the very least, Alchemist saw its damage increase. So yeah, that is a favorite weapon of mine, and I'm glad to see it having a little bit of a buff in this new update. Devil's Foursome damage has been increased by 13%, but here is the next bomb. Flacker now consumes the full magazine when fired, and the damage has been reduced by 33%. So the Flacker was essentially one of the top tier weapons in the game, by far one of the best weapons in the shotgun category, and it was so because the way it worked, it didn't consume the full magazine when it caused those explosions. So I believe that what this means is that once you shoot it once, it's going to consume all of the magazine to cause all of those chain explosions. So yeah, they initially believed that the resulting projectile spread would cause most of the explosions to miss the target. However, this turned out to be false, so we reduced the projectile damage and allowed the weapon to only fire once per magazine. This change encourages players to capitalize on different stat bonuses to maximize the weapon's damage output. But again, what are those stat bonuses if the damage overall was reduced by 33% and its functionality was changed? So again, a pretty significant nerf to an otherwise very powerful weapon that was used by quite a lot of players players for quite some time now. And the same goes with the laser exploder, which now sees its rocket projectile spawn interval increased by 0.4 seconds, so you're not going to see those exploding as often and being launched from the weapon as often. Again, not that much of a nerf, but again, those 0.4 seconds, if we learned anything from the previous similar changes, can be quite significant. Moving on to the Jacobs, the Maggie got the damage increased by 35%, a pretty hefty buff over here, but the Hellwalker had its damage reduced by 8%. It's not that big, it's not as big as I was expecting it to be, but it is still quite big over there, especially when you take into account the fact that certain skills, abilities or passives were what made this shotgun so particularly useful. In this case, if you had like something that returned bullets into your magazine, the Hellwalker would instantly become quite powerful. I wouldn't say overpowered because it was quite situational, though that 8% damage reduction definitely adds on top of the functionality changes that some of the classes had in the past. As far as Hyperion goes, we found that a couple of the legendary Hyperion weaponry bypassed the manufacturer's playstyle to easily making their bonuses greatly outweigh the penalties. The Butcher was drastically outperforming all metrics, and we chose to reduce the damage in order to keep the fast fire rate. In this case, the Butcher accuracy has been reduced as well as the damage by a whole 25%. Meanwhile, the Conference Call had its damage reduced by only 15%, so both Conference Call and the Butcher were two very good shotguns. It's a shame to see even more nerfs applied to them. I believe that these were actually in a very good spot. They weren't that overpowered compared to other weapons, but yeah, nonetheless, the nerfs are here and it seems that they have been applied to most of the top tier guns. Meanwhile, the Crossroad SMG had its accuracy reduced and it now fires 3 projectiles instead of 4, so this is going to be a significant damage decrease. You can pretty much read this like 25% damage decrease because instead of 4 bullets it only shoots like 3. So yeah, and it already had a pretty low accuracy to begin with, so I'm wondering exactly how big it's going to be in the new update. It was like 49% before and now it's going to be even lower. I really wanted this weapon to be exactly where it is because this was another weapon that I believe performed really well and didn't require any nerfing. It wasn't overpowered or anything, it's not like it ever one-shotted any bosses, it was just doing straight up good damage, it was behaving very good, so I'm not really sure if the reason for this nerf was fully warranted. These 3 weapons over here in the Hyperion category, these are the ones that I have the most doubts about. I think that this whole section should have never been dealt with. But anyway, the Vanquisher in the Dell category had its damage increased by 20%. Children's of the Vault weapons, we had the Skeksis that had its damage by 15%, that was a nice increase. Linog, damage increased by 20%, and Penny's power damage increased by 25%. Finally, we have the Atlas with Ruby's Wrath, damage increased by 10%, and that is pretty much it. And this brings us to the grenade section, because this is going to be painful for everybody who has been running a grenade build, and if you have done so for a while now, you probably already know that at the very least in terms of the infinite grenade spam build for Moze, Gearbox was already looking forward for at least a few weeks now to nerf this into the ground, and so they kinda did. These nerfs over here are quite significant. So the Hex and the Firestorm were calibrated to the wrong grenade modifier. As Gearbox puts it, they were supposed to be applying elemental dots to the targets and not actually dealing damage, but the way it worked in the game was exactly the opposite. It was dealing the full damage to the point that the dots, the elemental dots, almost became unnoticeable. So what they did is they, at least in the case of the Firestorm, damage reduced by 70%, the same with the Hex Grenade, and the duration is reduced to 3 seconds, and the only one that got a buff was Hunter Seeker with a damage increase of 25%, and that is it. But yeah, let me know down below what's your opinion on these changes, and in the meantime we're going to move over to the artifacts. The legendary Elemental Projector artifact had a bug resulting in the max value being displayed at 183% instead of 113, so now the damage max roll is reduced to 90%. And yeah, that pretty much covers it with the items. Now let's go over some of the Vault Hunters over here, because there is a few changes in here as well. And even Gearbox has recognized that the current meta is kinda stale, it's only centered around certain builds, and they are definitely planning on making other builds a little bit more powerful. In the case of Moses Iron Bear, Zane's Digiclone, and Flex Pet, they have all received buffs. In the case of the Iron Bear, the health has been increased by 50%, Pet health by the same margin, Digiclone health increased by 100%, and they also addressed a bug with Salvation where grenades were giving lifesteal. I'm not really sure exactly how good these buffs are. I mean, Iron Bear 50%, okay, that is good. All Pet health increased by 50%, definitely good for Flak, but the Digiclone health increase by 100% is not going to cut it for Zane. There's going to be a need for way bigger buffs than this. Anyway, on top of this, we have a bunch of bug fixes over here. I'm not gonna read these, but yeah, you can go ahead and read them. I'm going to post the link down below to the actual changes themselves. But yeah, again, let me know down below what's your opinion about these changes, which one of them you like the most and which one you will dislike the most. Let me know down below, and in the meantime, if you enjoyed this video, a thumbs up on it would be super appreciated. Also, don't forget to subscribe and activate that notification bell, and I will see you guys in the next one.